the limitless pot of gold that's available for attorneys taking that case, and hey, that's fine. That's capitalism, I guess. Even though it's on the end of so communist from these far left groups, they can name their thing.
What about the pro bono work, though? Also, it's obviously Maduro. If you got endless money, you're completely right. But whenever anybody who represents anything considerably like left wing, even if they have no resources, they're going to get the best pro bono counsel or have these legal foundations paying for counsel. Can you guys give me a little more color on the asymmetry of what's available on the other side?
Well, here's an example of the asymmetry. So the largest firms in the country that you're referring to, not only were not doing defense side pro bono work, which is classically what it's about representing indigent defendants, they were suing them. They were suing the January 6th defendants at the same time that they were being prosecuted for virtually the exact same conduct. So that was considered pro bono work for some of these large law firms. And it was totally crushing these protesters and their families. In fact, they're still dealing with the fallout today. So I think that's the first time I'd ever heard of pro bono work in suing, adding a parallel civil lawsuit on top of the criminal exposure of the person.
Yeah, Nick's absolutely right. I mean, if you look at these big, what in the industry referred to as the white shoe firms, 1,000 lawyer firms with a partner's bill at $3,000 an hour, or maybe probably more now. That's not my world, unfortunately. I've, through the years, back when I used to do indigent defense, represent somebody who's, convicted of homicide. And next thing you know, they're, the appeal's being handled by, Sullivan and Cromwell, or, these pro bono, right? So they're willing, and everybody's entitled to a defense, everyone's entitled to an appeal, regardless of whether you're factually guilty, legally guilty, both. You've been convicted, so I applaud them, those firms, for taking on those cases. But the irony of, hey, you're willing to represent someone who's convicted of murder in the second degree, but you would never go away anywhere near defending someone who's convicted of or guilty of a simple trespass because of the politics.
Yep. That's right, and as we look at potential areas for reform, with obviously restitution being chief amongst them, another one to remember is we're about a year out from the President Trump's executive orders as they related to big law firms. A couple took deals, a couple changed behavior allegedly because of the potential of deals, but a year out, and we have a paper coming out on this report because we basically followed up with every single law firm. I haven't seen a change in the legal culture at big law whatsoever. In fact, it seems many of these firms that were targeted now are in court and opposed to many things on President Trump's agenda. What are you guys seeing about any shifts since President Trump came into office in the big firm life?
I mean, again, I'm not immersed in that world, but I don't think there's been any shift. I think that, look, those firms are about dollars and cents. Okay, I mean, if you argue every private law firm, if you're not about that, then, or at least that's not part of what you're doing, you're not going to be in business long. Right. So, they may have, puckered their lips and held their nose and kissed the ring. But those were business decisions, and they weren't cultural shifts. The minute that Trump is out of office, or, if we do wind up having a Democratic administration in 2028, which obviously we hope is not the case, it's all going away. Okay, so that's them using their survival instincts and doing what they have to do. I mean, it's nice, but it is fleeting. It's temporary. It's superficial, in my opinion.
Yeah, we need to start searching for equal and opposite reactions, at least. I mean, when we look at the scale of what happened over the previous 4 years in the Biden administration, how much damage it's caused, we should be thinking in terms of permanent fixes to those things.
So that's exactly
proportional
right.
fixes.
You need structural changes.
Yep.
Putting in someone like Janine Pirro in Washington D.C. great. Some of the other U.S. attorney spots was with John Sarcone last night. It was up in Albany. Unfortunately, can't get confirmed because the judges there are trying to or have kneecapped him the way they did with Haba and so forth. All that's great, but it's all fleeting because it changes the moment the politics change. So if you're really trying to deal with weaponization and how to stop it from happening again to either side, because no one should be the subject of a weaponized government, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. But you need to make changes that are structural, that are going to endure, regardless of who's in the White House or who's in Congress.
That's absolutely true. And you'll never do that until there's complete political control, at least for the next few years, over the Department of Justice, and there's not now. Only about 1/3 of the U.S. attorneys are filled because the Senate is, relying on this blue slip tradition. And so if you're a U.S. attorney nominee from a state with a Democrat senator, you got 0% chance of getting through. It's
Absolutely. And if you talk to the U.S. attorneys, and once again,
Yep.
non-attribution, not naming names, but I've spoken with several of them privately, and they're there, but they can't. Their staff is still polluted.
Yes,
with,
I like that
with
term.
Generations of
Right.
Ideologically, I have no problem. I don't care what a prosecutor's political affiliation is, but these are ideologically driven people that occupy those positions. So who can the U.S. attorney trust? Who can they rely on? How can they fill positions even when they have vacancies? Because the job, frankly, doesn't pay very well, despite requiring high qualifications. And for instance, in Washington D.C., where is your pool of conservative-minded Republican lawyers for the U.S. attorney in Washington D.C. to pull from? Okay, now you'd say, all right, well, maybe if you expand the search beyond Washington D.C., but now you're asking someone to come from some other state, some other city, uproot their life and move to Washington D.C., where they probably or very likely have a family, own a home, have kids. For by the way, a job that's not going to pay any more than it pays anywhere else. And if you adjust for the cost of living in D.C., you're actually probably making far less in real dollars.
That's absolutely right. Nick, I want to get into the meat and potatoes weaponizations, but I want to make an addendum. Earlier, I was decrying the lack of a conservative legal movement, and that's not the right term. It's what these legacy institutions and graybeards and they like to call it, because they take some pride in what they think is a progression of victories, which is actually a progression of failures. What I mean when I say we need a legal movement, whatever the term should be, is really not even like ideological or political.
Right.
Frankly, I don't know what your guys' politics truly are, and nor do I care. When I use this term, like conservative, what I truly mean is like there is a constitution that affords people rights, and the judicial system and law enforcement should be the neutral arbiters of those rights. Everyone should get the fair shake. Weaponization should not be the selection of targets based on their politics or where they fit in the culture, and then apply.
And if those prosecutors had been earnest with themselves about whether politics was playing a role, they couldn't have said it, denied it. They could not have. So that's what weaponization is. Weaponization is taking a vague statute and prosecuting conduct that is typically related to speech, is related to politics. And it's very dangerous.
Yes, and to follow up with you, Tom, let me ask you this question in a really simple way.
Right.
Why do you think they prosecuted up in New York your client, Daniel Penny?
Well, in that particular case, what happened was pressure. My first conversations with the then assigned assistant district attorney, who I had dealings with, and is a good lawyer and a pretty reasonable guy. I can tell you that I don't think he loved the case, and I think that he saw the situation, at the very least, as being nuanced. And there were a lot of people in that district attorney's office who I know from first-hand conversations didn't think that case should be prosecuted. My initial conversations were, hey, we're going to take a slow, pragmatic approach to this. We want to do a protracted investigation. This is in early May, by the way, and maybe if we're going to go into the grand jury, it's not going to be probably not until sometime in mid-June. But in the meantime, we want to really kind of work through this. Okay, then what happened is, and keep in mind, 2023, early 2023, it was a different time than 2024, 2025. We've sort of, I think as a country, now kind of look back on BLM, and look back on the whole George Floyd thing, and even, sort of middle-of-the-road people or middle-of-the-road Democrats are like, okay, everybody got caught up a little bit in this area.
Maybe we shouldn't have burned a large part of the country.
Yeah,
Maybe it's a
yeah,
slight overreaction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe
Particularly
it's
compared to January 6th.
Right.
I mean, the dollars and cents
yeah.
there just aren't even in the same ballpark.
But all that stuff was much more raw, and we haven't, as a society, I don't think we had that inflection point at that time. So with the Daniel Penny situation, as more and more came out, and then it came out that he was a Marine, that he was white, that he was from Long Island, which, believe it or not, New York City, Long Island, Manhattan, Long Island is viewed as, Republican, as white, as, all sorts of connotations. And the Marines are the Marines, right? So the protesters then, like the day after that phone call, wind up on the tracks. They shut down the subway station. Al Sharpton is being Al Sharpton, along with, that whole narrative. And you have Alvin Bragg, who was elected on, his agenda of, racial justice and so on and so forth. And I wound up getting a call like 36 hours later from the same prosecutor, and you could tell that he was kind of sheepish and probably embarrassed, and said, look, I know our conversation we've had, but this is coming from the executive office, and I need your client to surrender tomorrow for arrest and arraignment. And what am I going to say? No. And it went from there. So in that case, you clearly had a prosecutor's office that bended really within 24 hours to the political pressure that was calling for my client's scalp. And that came, by the way, we talk about people like Al Sharpton, it came from right down the political line, including the governor of the state. So the governor of the state went on television and said, Kathy Hochul, you can't put your arm around someone's neck and squeeze it until they die, right? So how do you compete with that?
Mm-hmm. These are my words, not yours, but he was charged because he was white, and he would not have been charged if he was not, because it fit a preferred rhetoric about the narrative of race relations in the United States. It's unconscionable. That is no place in our legal system, and there should be severe consequences for violations of anyone's civil rights on the basis of race.
Well, I agree, but don't tell the district attorney that, including the prosecutor who actually wound up trying the case, who was a zealot, who was not reasonable, who was not anything like the first individual whose name I won't name. She was a true believer, and the amount of race baiting that was injected. She may have thought it was innocuously, but it was very obvious, right from jury selection to opening statements to summation. It was blatant, and it was really awful to see. I am a former prosecutor. I am not an ideologue. I'm not a zealot. I believe that most prosecutors, most line prosecutors, are not out there to railroad people for the sake of railroading them. I think that they wind up getting involved in weaponization. They probably don't even see it as weaponization or realize what they're involved in, but this was very deliberate. I had been litigating against the Manhattan DA's office for 20 years, and I'd never seen anything like this. And frankly, I hope never see anything like it again.
I hope so as well, and I think there needs to be consequences and making people whole if we truly want to prevent it from happening again, or at least mitigate the probability. Nick, we only got a couple minutes left too. Take us home with your final thoughts and close. Gentlemen, well said. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Cynthia and gentlemen, well said. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Cynthia and Patriot Freedom Project for organizing all of us, and looking forward to more great work.
Thank you, Mike.